Matthew Vick is an associate professor and the chair of the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at UW-Whitewater. He serves on the Committee on Pre-Service Teacher Preparation of the National Science Teachers Association and has published practitioner-based articles in the three K-12 journals of that organization. He has I'm sorry. He has collaborated with the Mukwonago Area School District and Elkhorn Area School District to plan and conduct courses for pre-service teachers on site at elementary schools that allows for a blending of academic learning and practice in classrooms. Excuse me. This work started as a result of an outreach grant from the UW-Whitewater School of Graduate Studies and Continuing Education in 2014. This work has resulted in a book chapter, conference presentations, and it will be the topic of today's presentation. Please welcome Dr. Matt Vick.
Thank you. So, thanks for coming out. We're going to be talking about the third space of teacher education and what that means and how that connects to the Wisconsin idea as well, which is the theme of this lecture series. So if you're not familiar, if you don't have any teachers in the family or you never found out how they got prepared, a pretty standard model in the United States in the 20th century and even into the early 21st century here, the first few years of college, they'll take their liberal arts classes as an elementary teacher. If they're going to be a high school teacher, they'll actually specialize in that subject area. By about their junior year or their third year on campus, they take what we call methods courses with professors like myself, where they're actually learning about the different methods that research shows is effective at helping students learn their subjects like science, social studies, literacy, and math. They then enter a pre-student teaching practicum or field study, which is kind of like mini student teaching. It's about half the semester. They go into a school, and that's, in a lot of ways, their first full-time experience. There's some sprinkling of what we call observation and participation, where they go in once a week and see things, and many of the methods classes will have them interact with students, but traditionally that's the point, the semester before student teaching, when they kind of get out there for half the day, and then student teachers or internships, which are basically equivalent, just whether you're getting paid or not, is the final semester when they're out there learning the trade from the practitioner's point of view, which leads to a bit of the tension of why this research basis from Ken Zeichner of a third space come up. Because traditionally they start with the methods courses with the academic knowledge, then they start seeing the practical knowledge in their field experience, and a lot of times they'll erase the academic knowledge that we've gone into in our methods classes, because our role in the university is to challenge the status quo, not necessarily radically, sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's to question and to think of different ways to go about teaching. And then when they go back into the K-12, sometimes that fits well with the academic knowledge, but a lot of times it's more practical. It's how do I get kids to pay attention when I'm in class and come to class on time? And that tends to crowd out some of that methods knowledge that they learned academically if they didn't get a chance to apply it. Ideally they do, but a lot of times they lose some of that. And then the work world, a lot of people that have done research, they'll favor a lot of the practitioner knowledge, the tips and tricks of the trade out there, which isn't bad. Don't take that as the message. But the idea of the third space is really to seek out a blending. So a first space from this research base is the academic knowledge that professors try to deliver, pedagogy or how to teach. People that have studied that, what are the best ways that we found? What are the trade-offs when you choose different methods of instruction? Curricular reform, what are new ideas that challenge the way we've traditionally taught in our schools? What are the benefits? What are the not so good things that sometimes come with that too? Having that critical discussion. Psychology really informs a lot of things as well. The cognitive science that sometimes challenges just the tips and tricks that are passed on with practical knowledge. And then of course they get to write lesson plans and unit plans for us in classes. And you're probably not too surprised. A lot of times they're like, well, it'd be different if I was teaching real students with that. Practical knowledge, a lot of times when they survey pre-service teachers, they're looking at classroom management, how to engage students, the activities that are fun. In science, a lot of times they'll look for something really fun on Pinterest or the Teachers Pay Teachers site, and what their students are supposed to learn comes second after that. And that's okay, but our role as university professors is to help them remember, well, our role is to help our K-12 students learn. So let's start with what the main point is there, and then find engaging activities that help along with that. So the third space is where to test out those academic ideas in a practical setting. Now, I'll give a nod because one of my predecessors before I came here, actually in the class, and I'm thankful that she had it set up, both Virginia and Liesel had it set up with the science methods classes that I teach, that they actually went out for about 4 class periods to do some of this blending in the methods class well before. And really what this research project with the outreach grant was, to my mind, taking it a next step of we actually take the methods class, we don't even meet at Winther Hall. We go to an elementary school and meet there for our class periods and blend these two areas. So the idea of the third space, we're taking university, K-12, and we're trying to have both blended there. So what's different about a methods course than the student teaching is it's early in their program. So they're getting to see that. We teach it actually physically at a local elementary school. And it involves both the academic knowledge from myself in this case as the professor, but the practical knowledge from the in-service teachers. And the goal is really to get rid of a hierarchy of looking at me as the professor of being an expert in some things maybe, but then to look at those classroom teachers that deal with kindergarten through 6th grade students every day as having an equally valuable set of skills and knowledge from the practical world and how those two things work together. So our project that's now in its 6th semester and going strong is a 1 semester long science methods course at Rolling Hills Elementary in Mukwonago. We meet for 2.5 hours every Tuesday, which is the minutes we would have spent back here on campus. And it's evolved a lot through each semester, but it's turned into, we meet for about 15 minutes at 8:45 in the morning. The students, the K-6 students are in the school, so they come in just shortly after that. We get going with some general stuff, and then they break into 2 groups because, as you can imagine, there's different bell schedules and recess schedules that we have to work around. So about half of them go out and get an hour in the classrooms right away. The other half stay with me for an hour and have a half-hour presentation where we do a model lesson of some different ways to go about teaching. We look at some of the research into how to do some best practices with science instruction. And then there's time to work on their lesson planning. And then we switch places. So the ones that were with me then go and spend their practical time in the K-6 classroom, and those that were out there come back in. This probably is more possible because of online learning, because what used to be 2.5 hours of classroom instruction on campus, plus readings and things outside of class, you lose some of that time to discuss pedagogy and big ideas of how do we change misconceptions about moon phases or other topics that come up in elementary and middle school science. Online learning has allowed us to push some of that outside of the meeting time with me so that the time in the schools is their emphasis on teaching real K-6 students, collaborating with myself and the in-service teachers, but they still have to learn about this vast knowledge base of what does research show us about the best ways the students learn science. So a lot of that now is online. They can listen to short podcasts sometimes or do readings that are kind of traditional college when you would have been assigned to do reading anyway. And then variety of forms we've tried. Online quizzes, sometimes there are discussion boards online or they turn in a reflection. That's a continual work in process to find the best way to do that. But that's kind of cleared up the time when we're meeting for them to actually go into the classrooms every single week of the course, because when you add something, you're subtracting something else. But online learning has really allowed us to preserve academic knowledge as well. Otherwise, we would just turn into an apprenticeship model of you're going to just repeat whatever your cooperating teacher does, which isn't all bad. But once again, our role as a university here is to look at the bigger picture and what are things we should try out, change, reform with ways that we go about science instruction. So what sometimes is perceived, I don't think this is the actual budding arrows between the professor's academic advice and the in-service teacher's practical advice, but sometimes I think students, our pre-service teacher students from UW-Whitewater, perceive that. They're like, oh, the professor wants objectives and standards, but the in-service teacher, all they're really going to care is, am I prepared? Do I have a really fun lab to go in there? And what's been powerful is they can see that, no, actually, I care about those too, and the in-service teachers do care about the pedagogy, some of the things that have come out of the research of the next generation science standards and how people learn, addressing misconceptions. And another part that really fits with the idea of the Wisconsin idea, and the reason Mukwonago and now Elkhorn starting this fall are excited, this is professional development for their in-service teachers. Typically in an elementary school, especially, math and literacy often are the focus of professional development in a district because those are big subjects in elementary, and that's not all bad, but science and social studies sometimes get a little bit left behind. But this is a way kind of a professional development in their own work through their collaboration with a pre-service teacher where they benefit as well. And I think the in-service teachers realize we're not going at each other, but instead we're all flowing together. We're advice that I'm giving as they design their lesson plans, the advice their in-service teacher gives, and the ideas that the pre-service teachers themselves come up with. We maybe aren't in a perfect line, let's be honest, but we're much more in a single direction than actually going at each other or something like that. And I think this model really helps that. Even in the traditional on-campus model, they would meet with a professor before they went off and taught at the end of the semester that way, but sometimes, to me at least, it felt a little bit like this, where they'd get contradictory advice, or they perceived it that way. So it's really been a benefit that way. So we've done a bunch of interviews with the in-service teachers that keep volunteering. They don't get paid to do this. They get the extra hassle of having a university student come in once a week. Really helpful sometimes. Sometimes they need a lot of nurturing, so it might take more time from them actually. But when we've interviewed them, a lot of strong benefits have emerged from that, and I'll show you some quotes in a minute. But this is just kind of a quick table of how this benefits pre-service teachers, in-service teachers, and I'll even say, probably should also say how it benefits me as a professor, because it keeps me grounded as well, balancing that academic knowledge and the practical knowledge, and not kind of coming in there too full of the ideas I keep reading about and going to conferences about, and keep bringing me back to what are the things that K-6 teachers are dealing with every day in their school. So, not surprisingly, pre-service teachers love that they can actually apply the stuff we talk about or that they read about and take a quiz on online in a lesson, in a classroom. And when we say you should use wait time and wait 3 to 5 seconds after asking a question before calling on somebody, they read that and don't process, and then they rush through and they talk faster than I am right now to get everything in this lecture. But they actually get to see that and reflect on it, and over 15 weeks, hopefully grow into some better teaching practices that way. And they love that they're with, quote, real students versus just kind of teaching each other and pretending they're students that way. And they love working with real teachers. I don't take offense at that. I did teach K-12 before being a professor, but a lot of times they're going to look to somebody that's right here, right now, working with those students, and that's definitely come through when we've surveyed them. It's refreshing because when we talk about science, a lot of times we're trying to get a more open-ended approach, sometimes called inquiry-based instruction, conceptual change, where you're not just telling kids vocabulary terms, showing them a demonstration to get them excited about science. It's not all bad, but a lot of research shows that if we get the K-12 students into the process of asking some of the questions, helping design the procedure, we don't throw them all on their own. We give them some guidance, but that this more open-ended way to teach science has a lot of benefits. They learn their content knowledge better, but they also learn what it means to be a scientist or an engineer. And even if that's not going to be your career, as a citizen in our country, you have a better idea of what this whole scientific enterprise and engineering fields has to do with as well. And when they get to see that having inquiry-based teaching, where I let the students take some ownership of these things, isn't a classroom management nightmare, I think it really helps them be much more open to some of the readings and discussions we have about teaching methods. Because otherwise, that's an early barrier a lot of them face. They're like, oh, I'll lose control. Nope, I'm just given worksheets and we're reading the book that way. So it's a really powerful way that from the first day of the class, they're able to challenge that misconception. And they get support both from me and the in-service teacher. And a lot of them still do come to the professor, but I just love seeing the emails that I get CC'd on or seeing them talking with the in-service teachers. And the in-service teachers, it's not a time drag on them because they do feel, when we've surveyed them and interviewed them, that's beneficial to them. They think about how they're teaching, going about things, and how science could be improved the way it's taught in their school as well. So the in-service teachers definitely benefit right away just from seeing activities they never had the time to set up. The outreach grant that was referenced at the beginning, that was kind of the impetus to this project, McWanago was adopting a new science curriculum the next year. So it nicely formed into a partnership where these pre-service teachers had the time and the drive from the professor to break into these new kits and products and teaching materials that they'd gotten to actually be a resource to their in-service teacher that was probably overwhelmed also prepping for math and literacy and those things to help out with some of the science lessons. Not necessarily in every classroom, but for some teachers that was a real benefit that way. Other times just the things that they researched on their own to teach the rock cycle, for instance, was a way that teacher never saw, and they incorporated into their own teaching that way. New teaching methods and ideas. a lot of times in-service teachers don't have the time to go back and read books about all these other ideas of different ways to try teaching topics. So they get to learn by kind of observing and learn by doing, because often they don't team teach with the pre-service teacher, but they're usually floating around the room as well and helping and learning from that. Several of the teachers reported also that it's an opportunity to have some leadership. If they're not interested in becoming a principal or a curriculum director someday, there's nothing wrong with that, but you kind of keep that same job role as a teacher. Things like this sometimes give a sense of empowerment of it's a different form of leadership for the next generation, which also goes with that whole giving back to the profession as well, but it's a really nice benefit for the in-service teachers as well. And they get to collaborate. A lot of times teaching is a very isolated profession. The door closes and you're with a bunch of whatever age group you're with, and you interact with adults in meetings and things like that. But it's powerful because they're interacting with a younger generation, and in some cases even with their colleagues at a grade level, because there's some discussion started by doing these type of things as well. So I'm just going to have some slides showing some of the research. I'm not going to read it all to you, so don't worry about that. But when we've given surveys to the pre-service teachers, we've gone through and coded the type of comments and the categories that the responses give. And probably not surprising that it's a real experience comes up a lot. And there were 24 students that were surveyed last spring with here. A lot of them mentioned that they liked the practical knowledge that they got to learn, the flexibility. But then there was a lot of things that they felt there was need to work on as well. And I'm just going to project some of the quotes and kind of highlight one on each of these slides. So these actually come from our college students when they were surveyed at the very end of the semester, anonymously, so they could be blunt, and some of them were very blunt with what they said. But things like, I think I learned a lot more from my homeroom teacher than I would from a book. Not surprising, but it's nice that they've conceptualized it that way, that instead of being on the campus, they're learning a lot just watching how they manage a room, ask questions, make it open for students, meaning K-6 students, to show their own thinking, and how as a teacher you should respond and not just carry on mechanically with a lesson plan from a textbook, but you actually have to change maybe how you were going to teach based on that. The practical experience here. I mean, it's things like not all lessons are going to be winners. They probably know that, but I think a lot of our conversations after they go and teach and realize it didn't work as well as I planned. Oh, I really should have tried the lab ahead of time, which is like, well, yes, you should have. But sometimes we have to make those mistakes ourselves to realize why we need to make the time to do that. Also, just a better sense of what grade level they want to teach. It's really nice that we've tried different models where sometimes they rotate grade levels. Currently, we're keeping them with one teacher the whole semester because some of the negative feedback from other semesters really shown they don't build a relationship with either the students or the teacher if we keep bouncing them around, so we're doing that right now. But still being in the school, some of their misconceptions of what first graders are like and that they don't know anything about science, that gets challenged very quickly as they see a lot of the background knowledge and just the thoughts students have about the world around them. And then 5th and 6th grade, when they're like, oh, I never want to work with big kids, they're scary to me, and realizing some of them going, oh, it's actually kind of fun. We can have deeper discussions about some of these different topics. So it's nice to broaden their own mindsets about grade levels to teach, because they never know where that first job might be able to come with. And of course, time management, that's not surprising to me as a professor and pretty documented in research literature as well. But they really get to see when they're putting a lesson into practice every week, especially when you're being more open-ended and you're not just scripted and giving notes or something, the flexibility needed by that, but also the experience it takes to pace those well. And that it's better to give enough time and go slower with your students so they actually learn the material and the content and the practices of science than to rush through and feel like you checked off a bunch of items they forget very quickly afterwards. So I wish I had more time in the classroom. We've changed. It used to build up from about 15 minutes to where they'd spend almost a full hour in the classroom thinking, oh, we'll take baby steps. But it's been pretty clear, and this is just an example of the quotes, they wanted to be in there more, which I'm like, thank goodness for online education, because once again, that's taking out time that we do at the college level stuff that way. But it's really succeeded this semester when we've tried this to be in the classrooms where they've built much stronger relationships with the in-service teachers and with the K-6 students, which isn't surprising to hear that spending more time there does that. But the students themselves, meaning my students, the university students, are realizing that themselves, which is always good that they're cognizant of those changes. And that also answered the question about it's hard to feel like you're thrown in and don't know the classroom, the expectations. It's really helped with that. It's also inadvertently been a benefit. oftentimes kindergarten and first grade rooms don't give an hour to science every day. So it's caused us to have some flexibility where they're going to be in there and do science maybe for 20, 25 minutes, and then they're in there to see literacy or math. But my challenge to them, and we're going to see at the end of the semester as I read the reflections and things like that and do some surveys with them as well, is are they seeing that actually science blends into math? Science does fit into literacy as well. And the in-service teachers know that as well, and I think they've been very receptive to fitting that in as well. And it's not a new idea to try to blend the curriculum areas, especially in the elementary school, but it's difficult because a lot of times pacing guides and minutes of instruction get broken down, and early teachers don't think in those terms. So we've taken a limitation and hopefully turned it into a strength. Then I conducted interviews with teachers that actually worked with me for 4 years with the older model where we'd be on campus, and then for 4 class periods, they would go out to the school. So they've seen that model, and then for the last 3 years have participated where we meet in this third space every week that way. And so they were purposefully selected that way to look at this. And this is where some of the research and where that book chapter that was mentioned came from. We looked at it actually has some effect. We're not claiming drastic effects at this point, but in their own outlook about pedagogy or how they go about teaching, especially in science, motivation about science. So all the teachers that I interviewed that had participated in both models said that. And then inquiry-based teaching, not surprisingly, they talked about. And then they did come down to talking about their own K-6 students' motivation. And we did a lot with engineering with the grant project, and a lot of them have kept using that in their own instruction as well. So just some highlights. And this is some of the most powerful part of in-service teacher pedagogical change, which is a fancy way of them being open and changing how they've taught science, because this has really been of interest to administrators because this is a benefit to their school district and to their K-6 students, because this is a service not only to the future generation of teachers, it's a service to the current generation of teachers that's there as well. So I feel just like I learned from them, meaning the pre-service teachers, at the same time they learned from me, and that these method students bring new ideas. So I mean, that's a perfect quote showing one of the goals of our project, and that a number of the teachers had that conclusion themselves. Kids are so much more engaged when they're doing the learning themselves and learning for themselves. And that was a bigger part of a quote of just a teacher talking about how they saw it's okay to let them play around with some of the safe science materials, and they didn't have to be led through every step of the way, and they made mistakes, but they learned more by making some of those mistakes than when they were just scripted through that way. So motivation, the engineering really caught on to a lot of them. And when you hear engineering in the elementary school, really it's not just to make everybody an engineer, but it's to get them to think about how to apply scientific principles, how to design things, how to be a creative thinker, how to work in a team, how to be collaborative. We happen in this district to have looked at engineering as elementary. In another district, we're going to be looking at Project Lead the Way's engineering curriculum for the elementary school, so it's neat to get to see a lot of the different ones that are out there in the area. But that whole idea of having even second graders designing a solution to a problem, for instance, one of the teachers that has been doing this for a while, they design a problem for a water filter. There's dirty water, and there's a story that goes about why that's an issue, and they make water filters out of sand and some rocks and coffee filters and that. But the students come up with their own solution, and then they have to revise it after they test it out with the, quote, dirty water. It's some water with tea and some dirt in it. It's not, and coffee grounds, it's not toxic by any means that way. But then they see how that changes, and then we are able to integrate some social studies and economics, because each of those things has a cost, and they have to get the lowest priced water filter possible. So that's one example of like an engineering project at the elementary level that's been done. Inquiry-based teaching is a big theme of the course, so it's also wonderful to see evidence from the in-service teachers that they grasp the elements of that model and how that can be used in some of their lessons. So for instance, I was just more of a facilitator, and they were drawing out the knowledge on their own. Me and the students were doing the experiment to learn about the concept versus a more traditional approach where they'd read about it and then do a lab that was supposed to prove to them that it really worked, but sometimes it didn't really work, so then they just pretended that it showed us the right result. It's much more strategic where these are examples where they're able to learn about the concepts while they're going along doing those type of things. also. They don't need me to always tell them what to do and do it this way. They do need me at times to tell them to try to find other ways and then to do it on their own. And it really fits well with the engineering projects, which I think a lot of the teachers grasped into. And then good self-reports as well about K-6 students being real motivated. And just as the professor, I can see that going into the schools, they get excited when the college kids come into the classroom to help teach these exciting science lessons. And they tend to be very engaging and dynamic because the pre-service teacher has a whole week to plan it. The in-service teacher is trying to plan all the subjects every day. So it's really allowed for a little more dynamic presentation sometimes. Not that the in-service teachers aren't doing a lot of wonderful lessons themselves, of course. So, any questions or thoughts that the lecture brings to mind? I'm looking away from the two other science education faculty members in the audience here so I don't get grilled.
I'm going to use a microphone so that we can hear everybody, but we have a question here.
It's always seemed ironic to me that we're talking about pedagogy and methods teaching for K through 12, but our higher education teachers don't undergo this kind of training. Do you see that changing, or has there been any research about that?
You know, the UW-Whitewater has a Learn Center that's been trying to change some of that softly, mostly through encouraging faculty members to learn more about pedagogy that way. Long term, I don't know if people's doctoral programs are going to start incorporating that. And in some ways, it's because some doctorate students are going to go to industry and would be like, that's not relevant to what I'm planning to do. So that's been well noted. It's a little out of my area of expertise, but I don't see drastic changes coming in the near future that way. Teaching colleges such as ours that highly value teaching, I think the people that choose to teach there as well often self-select and take advantage of those opportunities to improve their abilities as a university teacher that way. But it is an ongoing struggle. Yeah.
Other questions from the educators?
I think there's one there.
Uh-huh.
I would just like to make a comment about how fine the education teachers are. Teachers are being trained in Wisconsin. I have a daughter who teaches special education in Florida. She graduated from here, Whitewater. And I have said to her many times, why haven't you gotten any advanced degrees? And she said, this is not Wisconsin. She said, if I got one more degree, I'd be behind a desk.
Oh.
She said, that's not why I'm here. I'm to teach children in special ed, and she's been doing it for about 25 years.
Wonderful.
But she said, this is not Wisconsin.
Well, and I think that also reaches out to why some of the in-service teachers, once again, it's a form of leadership where you're not, quote, behind a desk. You're feeling that all the knowledge and experience you've gained yourself as an in-service teacher, you're able to pass on to others, which is the case with student teaching, of course, as well. But this is a way, especially in science and sometimes like social studies or computer science that aren't kind of those ones that are as much a part of the elementary day to do that as well with. But thanks.
Any other questions? Lots of questions?
Oh, yeah. I spent my life asking questions. I'm still doing it. You said that McWanago accepted a new curriculum in science. Is that curriculum consistent with the Common Core the next generation science standards?
They adopted FOSS, which has an NGSS module. I'm not sure. I think they got the third edition that didn't quite align with that, but informally, a lot of the work has aligned with NGSS, and the FOSS resources online have allowed us to have that discussion. I don't believe the district has formally adopted NGSS, though.
See, the state has not. That's why
Correct.
there's so much concern with Common Core Math and Common Core English Language Arts. But the English Language Arts has a really important section for science literacy. Do you walk through that with your students?
We touch on it. Once again, that 3 credits goes so fast with all the topics that way. We do, especially what they call informational text in the Common Core. Nonfiction is probably what most of you call it in your local library. That's been a really good match in our course because they do go, meaning the UW students go in and they have to actually go to Anderson Library, and sometimes it's the first time, and get one of the National Science Teachers and Associations outstanding trade books of science, which are wonderful nonfiction written by a number of authors. They just recognize them. They don't write them themselves. It's not self-promoting that way. And bring those into the classrooms, which is also a great professional development opportunity for in-service teachers to see those books brought in. So we do a little bit with using nonfiction and engaging students. Fairy tales are great and fun and engaging for a lot, or other stories, but reading nonfiction is a different skill, and using that to draw conclusions scientifically, which is what some of those standards talk about. So it's a bit in our course. I wouldn't claim it's the highest priority, but it is in there.
And do you walk through things on how do you teach students to do expository reading?
The children's literature course does more of that on campus. Some semesters I actually have done a little more with that, and this project did collaborate with Dr. Maxworthy O'Brien early on to do some of that. It's currently not happening quite as much as used to happen with that.
But the high school teachers, above all, need to learn to teach their kids to do expository reading because they don't do much of it. It becomes increasingly important with the Common Core standards, English language arts. Yeah. What about assessment of your students and also their planning of assessment for the students they encounter in the actual classroom? Like, can they demonstrate that the students did learn something? Or in some way, change the thinking they did have? Even if it went off the wall the wrong way, but change it in some way.
There's a project we do that's really focused on that, where they give a formative assessment probe. Sounds all technical. It looks like a worksheet with a bunch of options. So there's, why does the moon change shape at night? And then they give like 10 different students answers that try to tease out some of the common misconceptions that the Earth's shadow causes the phase of the moon, the clouds cover up part of it, and then the scientific answers are there too. And then after they give that to the whole class, they're required to do interviews with 3 students one-on-one, where they work on their questioning ability. And then they do write a paper that I read and grade, where they connect that. They have to label the type of misconception. Is it a non-scientific belief? Is it a preconception that people just tend to come up on their own from human nature? Is it something they maybe were taught wrong that way? That's probably the strongest piece of assessment. Other parts, once again, there's probably more we could do with that in the class. I do have them include that in their lesson plan, but it's not a huge emphasis point each week, to be honest.
I say that's cool. Your regular classroom teachers, they are graded all the time by the state. You know, how's the school doing on the grade card? Does that make them nervous in terms of accepting students in the classroom?
I don't have enough information, but I guess it doesn't seem like it, because there's 21 grade level teachers, K through 6, and I think we have 15 volunteering, it seems like eagerly, this spring to participate. So I don't think that's too much a problem.
The state grade card on schools.
Yeah, I haven't heard that brought up as a fear with this. Maybe it's because science tends to not be the one that's reported in the newspaper, unlike math or literacy, or maybe it's not much of an issue. The Mukwonago area school district's pretty well ranked in those, so that also might factor into that.
Who's doing the training of the teachers and how to use FOSS?
I think they got some professional development from FOSS that way. I wasn't personally involved with that. My argument with this project and what we worked out was that our pre-service teachers, I wouldn't claim they're doing the professional development for the in-service teachers, but they're helping them dig into those kits, learn how to use them that way for parts of them. Obviously, the in-service teacher has a lot of that work on their own that they're going to end up having to do. Thanks for the wonderful questions.
From the audience. Anybody else? We have a lot of wonderful teachers at UW-Whitewater, and I'm sure many of our kids and grandkids. Yeah, of course.
Not a question. There's a lot of former educators in this room, and you really make education exciting.
Oh, good.
And it almost makes you want to go back. So we thank the emerging teachers and the new ideas they're bringing to our children and grandchildren. And, well, we aren't going to go back, but it makes us want to go back.
Thank you. No, it is. It's a wonderful and exciting profession. Definitely is.
I think on that note, we'll probably close the Q&A, but if anybody would like to stay after and talk to Dr. Vick, he's available. So join me in thanking Dr. Matt Vick.
Thank you. Thank you very much.